Okay, once we understand how fractions work, that they're parts of a whole, divided into equal parts, we can now start thinking about equivalent fractions. And equivalent fractions are fractions that are the same size as each other. So some fractions can actually be the same as each other. Equivalent fractions are the same size or the same value. So let's start by using something called a fraction wall, which is a rectangle here. And in the top row of our fraction wall, we'll divide this up into halves. So we'll split that down the middle into 2 halves. And then in the next row of the fraction wall, we'll divide it into quarters. So into half, and then half again. So on our fraction wall, let's shade in 1/2. So we have 1/2 showing here. But if we now look down to the quarters, if we shade in the same value, so up to here, that means we're going to need to shade in 2 quarters for this fraction to be the same size as 1/2. So that means we can write that 1/2 is equal to 2 quarters. And this is what we mean by equivalent fractions. So 1/2 is equivalent to 2 quarters. Let's do a different example on the next fraction. On the next fraction wall. So for this one, we will use thirds. So the first one is divided into thirds. The next row, we'll divide each of those thirds into 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this fraction wall is showing thirds and ninths. Okay, let's shade in 2 thirds on the first row. 2 thirds. So to make 2 thirds in ninths, we're going to need to shade in 3, 4, 5, 6 ninths. So this means that 2 thirds is the same size as 6 ninths, or it's equivalent to 6 ninths. So the next thing we can do is start to convert or to make equivalent fractions. So if we go back to using 1/2, we can think, how did we go from 1/2 to get to 2 quarters? And we can see that the numerator went from 1 to 2. So we doubled it, or we multiplied by 2. And the denominator, it also multiplied by 2. It went from 2 to 4. So to make an equivalent fraction, what we can do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same value. So let's multiply by 3 this time. 1 times 3 is 3 for the numerator, and 2 times 3 is 6 for the denominator. So 1/2 is equivalent to 3/6. So we've made an equivalent fraction. And then we could make an equivalent fraction again. Let's multiply by 4, starting with 3/6. So 3 4s are 12, 6 4s are 24. So 12 24ths is equivalent to 3/6 and to 1/2. But we can also go the other way and make a smaller equivalent fraction. So if we start with 6 ninths, instead of multiplying, we can also divide to make a smaller fraction. And if we look at our yellow fraction wall here, we can see that 6 ninths was equal to 2 thirds. And let's think backwards. How did we go from 6 to 2? Well, instead of multiplying, we must have divided. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. And just like before, what you do to the top, you also have to do to the bottom. 9 divided by 3, yes, that's 3. So you can make an equivalent fraction by dividing as well. So here's this same one again. 6 divided by 3 and 9 divided by 3 gives us 2/3. Let's practice a couple more examples. So in this one, let's make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 40. So to go from 5 to 40, we need to think, what operation can we do to go from 5 to 40? And we know that 5 times 8 is 40. And what we do to one, we do to the other. So if we multiply by 8 to the denominator, we multiply the top by 8 as well. 5 8s are 40, 3 times 8 is 24. So 3/5 is the same as 24/40. These are equivalent. And here's another one that we want to make a denominator of 40. We have 7/4. So how do we go from 4 to 40? Well, we know that 4 times 10 is 40. And what we did to one, we do to the other. So we multiply the numerator by 10 as well. 7 times 10 is 70. So 7/4 or 7/4 is equivalent to 70/40. The other skill that we need to be able to do is to make smaller fractions, which we practiced before. And this is called simplifying. Simplifying means making a smaller equivalent fraction, and actually making the smallest one possible. Making the smallest equivalent fraction. So let's try and simplify 8/20. So remember, we can make a smaller fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator by the same number. And for this we need to think, what is the highest number that we can divide both these numbers by? And that means we're actually finding the highest common factor, HCF. So let's think of some factors that are common between 8 and 20. 4 goes into 8 and it goes into 20, so that will be our highest common factor. So we can divide 8 by 4, and what you do to one, you do to the other. 20 divided by 4. So we have 8 divided by 4 is 2, 20 divided by 4 is 5. So 8/20 on our fraction wall is the same size as 2/5. And that is simplified.